Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am going to be working on Berlin House and it's quite a bit of a process, but let's jump right into it. This kit is the Italeri 172 scale in plastic, and it was mostly put together by somebody else, but the hut on the top of the roof I did have to pull apart very carefully because it was built upside down. And that was not gonna work for me, so redo it was. I did have a lot of cleanup to be done on the little hut. I was using my hobby knife and my nail file to kind of try to very carefully clean up the parts. There was a lot of test fitting involved and quite a bit of time to clean it up. More test fitting. I needed to make sure that the door, the window there is actually in the correct orientation, so that it's gonna look proper when I put it back together. Once I was happy with where the walls went, I put them down in the places where I wanted them and then continued cleaning off a little bit of excess. Initially I was using the glue that I normally like to use, Tamiya Extra Thin. As I go, I found out that the plastic wasn't melting as well because it had already had a melting on it with the previous build. So I then ended up having to change to my super glue instead. I like to use the Rocket odorless super glue. It does have a viscosity that is quite thin, so you kind of have to use gravity a little bit to make it run into the places where you want it to go. In some parts I will need to be using my Rocket Blaster. It does harden the glue much quicker. In some parts of the hut I need to use a little bit of filler to fill in the corners because of the previous build. It wasn't being put together nicely. There was a little bit of a gap in between all the joints, so a little bit of filler to fill in those gaps was needed. After the hut was done, I primed the entire house grey, and then I did some dry brushing after talking to my partner a little bit to figure out how to make the brickwork kind of pop a little bit. After the brickwork, I then turned my attention to the window frames, and I wanted them to be a little bit more visible than the brickwork, so I added a little bit more white to them. Once I was happy with the bottom floor, I turned my attention to the top floor, and based on the colors in 1940 to 1945, it needs to be red and white on the top floor. On the top floor, I used the same dry brushing technique to highlight all the brickworks and the window frame. It's really nice to see how it gets together. I have to be very careful so I don't get the white in where it's supposed to be red. A good few work hours later, I turned my attention to the roof, and first I'll be working on the tiles around the roof. I did a leather brown all the way around as my first coat, and then later on I will be using a blood red actually to kind of simulate the brickwork for the roof tiles. On the roof section, there was lines in there in the case that you would have had a third layer of floors on this building, because there is an expansion kit available for this building. Because I don't have the expansion part of this set, I then ended up needing to fill in those grooves because they were not going to look good. For the blood red, I will be using a dry brushing technique to only try to highlight the raised parts of the tiles. Once the first layer was completely dry, I went back over again and did another layer, but was using a little bit more red to kind of give it a little bit more of a highlight and dimension on the bits that I wanted to show off more. I wasn't happy with the first layer of the filler on the top floor, so I ended up going back over it again and filling it a little bit more, because you could still see a little bit of a divot into it because I hadn't put enough filler in for the first round. If I had put enough filler into that the first time, it wouldn't have dried as quickly as it did. So I always like to do a bit of filler and do then a little bit of sanding and then see what else I need to fill it up further. While the filler was drying, I decided to do the roof on the little hut, and I'm using the same technique as I did around the edge of the top floor as well. And while that little roof was drying, I then went over the edge of the roof to do a dry brushing technique to highlight the tiled look to the roof. I managed to put a little bit of white where there wasn't supposed to be any white, so I went back over again to tidy up those tiny areas with my blood red. Time to add the textured bits to the roof. I'm using the same blood red as I did around the edge, and I was putting a little bit on the doors as well to kind of try to weather them a little bit, not very much though. Here's the paint colors I was inspired by for this. Time to paint the little hut. I will be using pale sand for this, and I will do several thin coats to not have any of the brush strokes actually show up. First coat is drying, and while that does dry, I will be using some cork on the floor of the roof. It was time to put a little bit of weathering around the windows, so I added a little bit of brown. I put a top coat of lacquer on top of the paint to seal it all in, and then came my next task to add all of the windows in. The windows on the second floor was a little bit harder to do because there was different levels of the windows. I had to cut up the pieces in much shorter bits. It was time to put the finishing touches on this. I painted underneath the ledge of the roof tiles, and that was then finished. The footage on this video was roughly about 10 hours of work, and I managed to condense it as much as possible. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.